Jack Parsons got me on the moon. Jack Parsons got me on the moon. Good evening, presumably, but you could be listening to this in other parts of the world during the day, so good day, good night, good morning, wherever you are, whoever you are. Welcome back to the Philosophy of Now. Very much a limited engagement these days because I have so many other things going on. With me, Thomas Sheridan. This is the second broadcast of VoN we've done on Beyond Room 313 YouTube channel. And this is also doubling, I guess, as the Christmas Yule Saturnalia special. I hope you're all keeping well, as we've now passed the 1,000 days mark of since the human race has been under attack by a spiritual cosmic force. And I have no issue in saying that, and hopefully in the next while, as this program progresses, you'll see why I feel this way. Firstly, this is not a negative or a dark or a frightening program to listen to. It's very much in the keeping of a Yuletime ghost story in the Celtic pantheon. Now coming to the end of Samhain. And Samhain at this time of year would have been of stories in the darkness by the firelight. And they would have been about warriors, ancestors, supernatural beings, dark ones and light ones. And as we entered the shadow months, the shadow days of the year, invariably the stories would have turned to stories of the Puka, the Slauwira, and all kinds of other dark manifestations of the psyche and of nature spirits. Why? Are people frightening themselves and children deliberately on purpose? Not at all. You think of this time of year as being the 3:30 a.m. of the entire cycle. You have to confront what's in the shadows in order to make manifest beings of light when the sun rises. You can't appreciate the colours of the flowers, the wings of a butterfly, and the bands of the rainbow when it was a natural phenomena and not a political one, until you've been in the darkness. And this is why we find a strange comfort within the darkness, within the ethereal twilight dip into the night. Our subconscious mind ultimately knows that we are being given information that's necessary for our ego survival within this 5-sense reality matrix. So, in the scheme of this, think of this broadcast tonight as not something to frighten you or make you worried, rather to give you the tools of survival for when the new day comes, the second renaissance, or whatever you want to call it. You have to confront the minotaur within the labyrinth in order to walk out of the labyrinth. You have to realize that the dancing shadows on the wall are chimeras, phantoms created by pathological forces, so you can escape Plato's cave and march back into the sunlight of a new day. This is why we have the tradition of the Christmas ghost story. Charles Dickens, his famous ghost story, Christmas Carol. It's all deliberately done for this time of year. I remember the BBC used to do a program back in its heyday called A Ghost Story at Christmas, and one of them was a remarkable version of The Signalman, Charles Dickens story, starring Dylan Elliott, about a signal box man in a rural branch line in England regarding a train crash that happened inside a tunnel near where he worked, and the phantoms and the manifestations of that accident being held as a repository, not only within the darkness of the tunnel itself, but also within the psyche of the signalman. And he opens up to an English gentleman who becomes friends with him and starts having chats with him in the signal box. And as a result, the shadow is brought to the surface. And check that out. I'm sure it's online somewhere. The Signalman. It's from the late 70s with Dylan Elliott. And here we are again at the Yule dark Christmas Saturnalia point of the year. And you are here to enjoy yourself. You're here to make light in the darkness. This is why we eat sweet things at this time of year, to ward off the cold. This is why the flickering flames dancing in the fireplace seem so extra magical, complemented by the lights on the Christmas tree or whatever. This is why you have in the Jewish festivals the Hanukkah, the festival of lights. We're in the darkest point of the year now. But everything within our consciousness and everything we are exposed to is the natural play of contrasts, light and shade, dark and light. Tonight I want to talk about a few things, but they're all basically intertwined in the same thing. I know you probably don't want me talking about the last 1,000 days since the beginning of spring 2020, but I'm sorry, this is what it has to be. I hope that it's not going to be just a general rant or some kind of morbid dive into the after effects of what we're being put through, and which we've survived. This is the most important message of this entire broadcast, is what we've survived. Before I came to do this VoN Morning Light Broadcast 2/Yule Christmas recording, I thought about an Antoine Deco sketch. I thought about a few song parodies like I used to do in the old days. I'm sorry, folks, I can't bring myself to do it this year. I'm not there. There's a time to play, there's a time to laugh, there's a time to rejoice, and there's a time to dive into the subconscious shadow realms to try and make sense of what we're facing, and this is it. So this show is going out at 10 o'clock in the evening, the UK and Ireland, 11 in continental Europe, and you're sort of sitting around having a glass of wine or a glass of brandy or beer, eating some sweets, enjoying the evening. And this is not a darkened tale. This is not a morbid discourse a cul-de-sac of misery. Please don't think this show is going to be like this tonight. It's going to be very much the opposite. But in order to survive a war, you must understand the rules of engagement. The rules of engagement are very clear. We are in a spiritual battle. This culture war that the mainstream media talks about is a spiritual attack upon us. The biological techno-pharma transhumanist tech assault upon our consciousness is a spiritual attack upon our humanity. And it's only the people who understand this are the only ones who've survived so far. And we're safe, we're in the clear. Of course, we have to be vigilant, but we're in the clear, more or less. We've survived. We've gotten this far. We've taken it to this level. So rejoice, as the Christians say. Rejoice that you have survived a battle and a war. But there's still a kind of a homework that has to be done. I'm a firm believer in that if you don't do an analysis of a problem, the problem returns. You must fully do an autopsy, diagnostic dive into where you were and what created it. And then look at things in the past that may have hinted to elements of this haven't happened before. Now, those of you who have been following me since, well, some of you have been following me for over a decade, but those of you who have been following me since the Rona Chronicles knew very well from the start, well, within a couple of weeks, that I'd already realized that this was a supernatural event. Now, I really mean that in the purest sort of like Fortean paranormal aspect. This is a supernatural war we're involved in. We've read the stories and the mythologies of people talking about the great battles in ancient times. You have the Battle of Puruvashta in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna appears to Arjuna. Krishna is a supernatural being, a god. You have stories in the Nordic pantheon of the Valkyries appearing. You have stories in even the Christian wars of the Templars riding into battle against Saladin, overwhelming numbers, and believing and seeing their dead comrades rising from their grave like necromancers, and they were charging towards the Muslim warriors who panicked and ran in terror. This is where J.R. Tolkien got his concept of the army of the dead. You have it in all forms of mythology, that there's an earthly battle against other mortal humans, the opposers on the other side, coupled with a supernatural imperative that's as valid within the story as the battlefield tactics and how the chariots were drawn up, what kinds of weapons were used, how the armies were deployed, and who led what, who fought what, and who killed what, and who was slain by what. But all the time, there was a supernatural element interjected into the story. Well, we have that today. Yes, we have the monstrous dregs of the biotech industry. We have the horrors of the tech industry. We have these mediocre psychopaths of globalization, bureaucracy, and we have the mind-mashing monsters of the mainstream media. Yes, they are the mortal plane. They are the flesh. They are the flesh. But there's more to it than that. There's a supernatural imperative, the spiritual dynamic. And the fact that we recognize it and they don't is the reason why we did not take the transubstantiation of the needlecraft. Something within our subconscious mind, learned from those Grimm brothers' fairy tales, learned and took note of things within the Arthurian legends. How many of us listening to this show today watched the Lord of the Rings movies over and over again during the lockdowns? Something that had been deposited in archetypal form within our subconscious minds through being exposed to these great stories, these great legends, these great myths that were unleashed at the moment when our own generations, our own version of this species, at this chronological juncture in time, took note and said, yes, there are flesh warriors in front of us. There are wicked enemies. There are brainwashed passive enemies. But beyond this, there is a supernatural force. Now, over the years, people ponder these things. If you're Christian, it's a straightforward battle of good and evil. Pagans don't see the world in that way, particularly, well, when I say pagans, I'm not talking about Wiccans and things like that, you know that. I'm talking about, like, people from the neo-pagan world. We see things in a much more sophisticated way than goodies and baddies. In fact, one of the problems we have, and one of the things that probably put me off Christianity, was this inability to see the grey area, the Jehovah binary code aspect of it. Good, evil, and nothing else. When you divide evil into its some parts, you become aware that there are two kinds of evil. There is the absolutist, aggressive evil, which attacks for the sake of its own pathological drive. It wants power, it wants control, it wants destruction, it is sadistic. It defiles for pleasure. And then you have what you would call a passive evil, and I'd put that evil in quotes, is the basking shark swimming through the ocean, scooping up 1,000 shrimp. To the shrimp, the basking shark is an evil creature. It's evil because it's going to scoop them up and digest them inside its stomach. But to this basking shark, the basking shark is just living. It's not personal. It means nothing of any malice towards those shrimp. Well, I'm here to tell you tonight that we are the shrimp. We are the krill. We are the algae. We are in a similar position. But because of the complexities of our humanity, the dynamic nature of our cultures and society, that we have the absolutist evil amongst us, attacking us, who were once part of our species but are no longer. That there is another force that's an opportunist force that takes advantage of natural catastrophes, wars, and other calamities that affect the humans as a whole, and serves it for its own agenda.
I saw this illumination that was moving with respect to the stars. We were smart enough to not say, Houston, there's a light out there that's following us.
They are here. They're parked on the side of the crater. They're watching us.
Hey, I just saw a flash on the lunar surface. It was a bright little flash right out there.
In paganism, one of the things that we've lacked, for our own measure, is we have not fully understood the notion of a space paganism. I believe that H.P. Lovecraft basically wrote the canon of the New American Pantheon space gods with his fiction, and you've seen me cover that in my film Lever Providence. But we've been lacking in an engagement in a way of dealing with it. You just look at our ancient ancestors, they I would love to know what they thought when they looked at the stars, I would love to know how they felt and what they thought when they looked at the stars. That they saw these points of light, and they saw the planetoids, the wandering stars that became the planets. They looked at the Milky Way. Yes, we have the star lores, the astrology that developed out of places like India, Sumeria, and other parts of the world that were cloud-free generally. We don't have a star lore to the same extent, if at all, in Northern Europe, simply because of the cloudy skies. So you had in these sun-kissed cultures of clear nights, they could impose simulacrum gods and stories upon the star shapes in the forms of constellations. But it never went any further than that. It's very easy for humans to develop a narcissistic, isolationist mentality. You see it all the time in things like climate change, the climate change science. It gives almost no credence to the effect of the sun and other things, cosmic rays and so on, from outer space in terms of affecting the climate of the Earth. It's isolationist. It's marooned on its own empirical island of materialism. And humans have tended to do the same. We have an infantile relationship with space. I really do believe that. Well, we have until recently, until the 20th century anyway. This aspect is a downfall on our behalf. Human beings in the sense of the cosmos, and I'm not saying we are, but I'm just using this as an analogy. We could be little more than bacteria on a petri dish. How does the bacteria on a petri dish in a lab comprehend the human being picking up the petri dish to examine the spread of bacteria, dressed in a white coat, who may be a woman scientist who's broke up with her boyfriend or her husband, is worried about a divorce, is not liking her job really, and she's sticking a needle or a pin into the bacteria, messing it around, killing the bacteria, going back to her own life, getting into her car, driving home, having a row with her ex-husband, picking her kid up from school. How does the bacteria in the petri dish understand that? Okay? And for the bacteria in its own primitive bacterian consciousness to say, we fully understand what's out there. We're learning about it. By the shapes of the white coat of the scientist or the occasional prod of this metal thing coming into the petri dish, it's absurd. But here we are, humans, on our pale blue dot, in the vastness of a black sea of who knows what, thinking we could go to other planets, thinking that life is only existing here until we get a beep or a signal or a pulsation from another world. How foolish our sciences are in this regard. How foolish is the bacteria in the dish assuming the same. I don't believe that space is anything like we believe it is or think it is. I do believe that around this planet, up until a certain distance, we can, with great difficulty, get out there in material spacecrafts. I think the moon is probably the limit. Now, it's probably even the Earth's geographic field, the Earth's gravitational field. And we may, as creatures, be very much bound by the gravitational nature of this planet in terms of a quantum effect. The main reason why we have such difficulty hacking the matrix, as they say, is because the quantum matter on this Earth, on this planet, is so incredibly dense, it's very difficult for us to get even outside something like the double slit experiment. You have magic and things like that, but in general, the average person. These effects seem to lessen as you exit the strength of gravity. And I don't believe that we can travel beyond the moon. I think well, a little bit further, because the effects of the Earth's gravitational forces do extend way out into space, way past the moon. But these gravitons are almost like forces we are bound to. And as we move away and they become lessened, our sense of reality in terms of our consciousness, it dissolves. The Apollo astronauts never came back the same people they went out as. That's why they'll never go back. And I think this new Artemis mission has gone out a little bit further. And that's risking a very dangerous thing. We can send unmanned probes out, we can send machines up, but we most certainly cannot send the human consciousness up into space. Absolutely not. As H.P. Lovecraft said in the opening of the Call of Cthulhu, it was meant that we shouldn't voyage far. The bacteria can only have so much power beyond the Petri dish. I often wondered if Apollo 13 was almost like a shot across the bow, that some cosmic force took a shot at that spaceship as it was circumnavigating the moon in orbit as a warning. Maybe Apollo 13 went a little bit too far out past the dark side of the moon. It makes you think about things like rockets, doesn't it? It makes you think about that. Like, if you look at a rocket firing off into space, isn't there an aggressive nature to that? It's like a bullet being fired from a gun, or an arrow being shot from a bow, a spear being thrown from a hand, or a dart from a blowpoint, being fired at this space, penetrating it, going into it. What if that space out there is a conscious being that would take such actions as sending rockets up as being acts of hostility? Maybe the needlecraft are the rockets being fired back.
Until 2 days ago, that sound had never been heard on this earth. It's a report from man's farthest frontier, radio signal transmitted by the Soviet Sputnik, the first man-made satellite as it passed over New York earlier today. Space. The course of United States policies in the competition with Russia has been severely shaken.
Something happened in the 1960s. And I and others are still trying to figure out what that was. There was something different about the 1960s. And I think what changed in the 1960s has led to this whole concept today of people seeking traditionalism. People who were not even, by their nature growing up, conservative or anything like that. In fact, most of the people I know who are currently embarking on this search for traditionalism were generally liberals like myself. And we suddenly found out that the goalposts and paradigms had been changed, and we were no longer what we believed in. Liberalism or progressiveness was considered what we thought it was to be. Reality had been gaslighted. And what caused this? You know, we often think about this. What punched the hole in the veil of reality that opened the portal that allowed this alien force to come through and take over the leaders of the world, the influential voices in society, and create the completely unrecognizable monstrosity that passes for Western civilization today? What was the key? What was the code? What was the convention we had before the 1960s that offered some kind of protection against this alien occupation force that now runs this planet, that was breached in those days and opened up and allowed whatever it is out there, around there, in amongst us, that stretches the length of a galaxy and fits between an atom? What is it? What has allowed it to come in? Recently, someone had mentioned Vatican II to me, and I think that's quite an interesting thing. If you don't know what Vatican II was, in the late 1960s, the papacy had a conference to modernize the church. This had come out of a kind of a knee-jerk reaction to the growth of Presbyterian religions, particularly in places like Korea and in Africa and other countries, that it seemed like the Catholic Church in its own mind was losing ground to the Reformationists, to the Lutherans, the Calvinists, and so on. And so they embarked upon this conference to modernize Catholicism. And the main point that came out of that was that they cancelled the Latin Mass. Many Catholics were shocked by this, that the Latin Mass had been the traditional form of ceremonial worship in Catholicism going right back to even pre-Christian times. It came out of the temple of Jupiter, or Lupitor as the Romans do it, spelled with an L. And continued on to the late 1960s. There was something in the Latin language, in a ceremonial sense, which is why it's used so much in ritual magic, that provided protection. And when it was removed, the Latin Mass also carried a lot of sense of transcendental magic with it. Even though people went to church services all over the world, and most of them wouldn't have understood Latin, they knew that they were being subject to something very mystically powerful by the incantations and the venerations contained within the sound of Latin. Much the same way that most Jews go to Hebrew services at synagogues and don't speak Hebrew. But there's something about the rabbi singing in Hebrew that, I've heard it myself, it's remarkable. That there's the ancientness of these languages carry with them some kind of thing that reaches deep into your spiritual soul, like the call to prayer in the Islamic world. There's something about that. And the Catholic Latin Mass contained all that. And in Vatican II, the 1 billion Catholics in the world almost lost a sense of perhaps deep spiritual resonance with their faith. And ever since that moment, Catholicism has been constantly struggling. It was all the sex scandals and everything else came out after that. And the papacy moved more into a kind of a diplomatic globalist organization that you have now under Pope Francis, where you even wonder if Pope Francis is even a spiritual man. Saying things like, if you don't take the needlecraft, you don't get to heaven. What the hell kind of Pope is that? I know he's a Jesuit and everything, but this is the strangest. Something happened in the 60s. You know, the communists removed religion and officially banned religion under the communist state in the USSR. And they replaced it with a thing called cosmism, which was this belief that gods and souls and dead ancestors existed beyond the Earth's domain. They were out in outer space. And this was even sold to people and taken very seriously, that communications with the ancestors and encounters with spirits and gods would take place in the outer realms beyond the Earth. If you have seen the film Solaris, there's two versions. There's one with George Clooney, and the original one, the original Soviet one, where the astronaut meets his dead wife in space. That's based on cosmism. That what's accessible in space is not accessible down here. That it's almost the acknowledgement by the Soviets that is the land of that is the domain, the realm of spiritual experiences, but not this planet. And maybe there is something to that. You know, we're not meant to travel far. And the 1960s was also when the first manned space missions happened. You had Yuri Gagarin and then Alan Shepard on the American side, and culminated with the Apollo missions and all the other things that happened in between, the Soyuz missions, and humans going into space. Now, was this a transgression into a domain where humans were not meant to go? I don't know. I'm just putting stuff out there. Of course, you could bring it all back to Parsons and Hubbard after World War II. And, you know, Parsons was the father of the American space program, Hubbard being the father of Scientology, and both of them were attempting in the desert to create a moonchild. And the embodiment of Babylon, Marjorie Cameron, who became Parsons' wife, who was basically the mother for this moonchild, she was one of the first people, in fact, I think she was the first person in the US, in the United States, to make an official account of a UFO sighting. At the same time, the first real UFO sightings took place almost immediately following the Babylon working by Parsons and Hubbard. It happened over Scandinavia, and then they followed after that was the, Roswell and everything else from that point on. So you could make an argument to a point that Parsons and Hubbard opened the gate. It was the opening right of this Lever Velocity, as the film I called it, if you've seen that, and this passing through the threshold. And when Yuri Gagarin or Alan Shepard both entered into that realm of cosmism, that it was seen as a violation of the gods, of the Lovecraftian elder gods, cosmic, you could call them what you want, but the forces of consciousness that exist outside this planet. So we sent pointed rockets up into their world, and now they're sending pointed syringes into our domain. You do have to wonder. The 60s was so strange in that sense. You had civil rights movements brought about all over the world, from South Africa, apartheid, Jim Crow in the United States, the situations in Africa like Biafra. You had the events in Cuba, Northern Ireland, and on and on and on, Czechoslovakia. This was a sense that there was a movement in humanity towards overall freedom. And This appealed to people on an emotional level. But emotions are funny things, There's the emotion that's spiritual, and there's the emotion that's almost like a biochemical expression of platitudes. The superficial or something. We seem to live in a world today where all these emotions, when people wave rainbow flags and scream about inclusion and diversity, and go on about their emotions, it seems completely fake and false. Just like the Catholic Mass is fake and false today, when it's done in English or whatever language you live in by some priest, and you have a guy with a guitar singing, Joseph Rowed a Boat or some other folk song, which also started in the 60s as well. The whole folk mass thing came out, this folk revival, but it wasn't even an interesting folk revival. It wasn't the music of, Woody Guthrie, or it wasn't the music of Robert Johnson. It was the music of the Mamas and the Papas and Peter, Paul and Mary and all that naff stuff, Michael rowed a boat ashore. What was Michael? What was his boat? And what was his shore? One of the reasons, and so many of the Lovecraftian stories have powerful Jungian overtones to them, which only serves to show how remarkable Lovecraft was. That he was aware of the subconscious ripples on the surface of a water, metaphorically, was echoed disturbances in the deep waters and the deep depths. So you have a situation where in the horror of Dunwich, before it begins, people notice and hear strange sounds and movements in the woods in the hills behind the town, behind Dunwich. It reminds me of the song by the Police, Synchronicity 2. I mean, that's how far we've fallen. The Police could have a hit song in the early 80s that contained Jungian themes inside it. And the song Synchronicity 2 is about a middle management business guy in the south of England whose psychic state and psychology is being torn asunder by his life, his routines, his humiliation in front of his boss, his unresolved sexual frustration, the unrequited torments of suburban life. And Sting, to his genius, wrote the lyrics that his inner turmoil was reflected by the Loch Ness Monster underneath the lake in Scotland, coming to the surface to knock on the door of a cottage. Very Lovecraftian, very Jungian, but as valid as it ever was, and especially today. The ripples on the lake, on the surface of the body of water, showing us that there's great disturbances and great danger sometimes at the bottom of the lake or the sea or the slow-moving river. I can remember being in Sri Lanka and seeing this standing by this lake, this lagoon at night, and looking at these beautiful army of giant bats, flying foxes coming out of the jungle. These beautiful creatures flying slowly. And at the side of the dock, you're sitting there and you're under, that on that water, under the darkness, as the sun is setting, it's filled with saltwater crocodiles that can just leap out and get you. And you might see in the distance a shimmering on the surface of the water, and that's the saltwater crocodiles underneath the surface. Among the dark, foreboding depths of the lagoon. This has always been a phenomenal metaphor. The disturbance in nature, the auguries. So today we see something like J&B Whiskey, a Scotch company, producing an ad where it shows an elderly gentleman dressing himself up in drag and then teaching his prepubescent nephew how to wear makeup. And it is completely a metaphor for pedophiles pouring young kids full of whiskey so they can abuse them. That is a disturbance on the water. This is why it affects us so badly. Not so much the sight of a child having drag makeup put on him by an older man, but because that's a disturbance on the surface of the water, showing us what's really going on in the murky, horrific depths. And what's going on is exactly that. Pedophile groomers giving young prepubescent boys alcohol so they can molest them. That's what the J&B ad tells you. It doesn't say that overtly, but it's a shimmering, a disturbance, a rippling on the surface of the black water that warns us of what's going on below. It's no different than in the Lovecraftian stories when there's a strange noise in the woods at night that no one can explain, under a gibbous moon before the horrors are unleashed. That we live in a world today that is not a product of human beings. It is absolutely not. You look around you, you look at the situation today, the reason why some of us have become traditionalists in our nature is not that we're seeking a conservative world of the past, of the nuclear family of, a mother, father, and 2 kids. It's gone beyond that. It's much, much darker. We have been taken over by an alien force. Not us, not people who listen to this show, but look around you. And its job is to get the human race to destroy itself. And its rocket ship is needles, syringes. Forget about the needlecraft that we've had since 2020. I recently came upon a document that's to groom children in Canada to commit assisted suicide. And how is it done? It's done with 3 injections. One that puts you to sleep, one that puts you in a coma, and the third one is the transubstantiation of the sacred obliteration needlecraft. We send pointed objects into space. They're sending pointed objects back to us. And this is only but one of the rationalizations I could use. I just don't know. I'm still looking. Some other people who may have a more conservative outlook may say, oh, it's something like the breakdown of a family. Oh, it's something like the legalization of abortion. It could be those things, and it could be all those things, but the thing is we're all on a similar or same kind of grail quest. As if there is a supernatural or occultic object or device or something that existed in the past that protected us from invasion in the past that we could utilize again. So many science fiction stories are about this, like in H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. It's an ancient human bacterial virus that kills the Martians. These kinds of things were an object, a system, something that can help us. But we are. I say this unashamedly, that we are under the control of an alien force. That when I see Scotch adverts of elderly men putting makeup on prepubescent boys to turn them into little drag queens, I know that is not the human race. That is not planet Earth as it should be, that is a violation of everything of natural law. Drag queen story time, these grotesques, reading fairy tales to children, that is a violation of natural law. And you would say to yourself, oh, it's just a bunch of freaks here and there. But the remarkable thing is that these psychotics, I mean, I saw the other day, someone had mentioned about the possibility on a sort of Facebook page, news comment, that the people are getting sick because of the needlecraft. And this individual came in and said, other than your own magical thinking, do you have anything to back that up? And then posted a GIF of someone who reality, it's the famous Father Ted thing where dreams and reality and imagination and reality have to be kept apart. It's like a joke thing, just imply that somebody is not able to think straight. And then I go to this individual's page, and it's a middle-aged Irish man wearing a frock and makeup. And they always give themselves names like Guinevere, Charlotte, Lilith, Esmeralda. And they're grotesques. And he actually posted, don't friend me if you're looking to hit on me. And this was the individual who had the audacity to say to somebody else that they didn't live in reality. That is not planet Earth. That is not humanity. Something has taken us over. The 1970s, the early 1970s, late 60s in fact, were a very peculiar time in the sort of Anglo-sphere in terms of a spiritual necessity. As Christianity had been basically dead in these sort of like, when I talk about the Anglo-sphere, I mean like the countries, the Presbyterian countries, Britain, United States, Canada, Australia, that stuff, South Africa, Rhodesia, New Zealand, basically Christianity was dead by the 1970s. It was probably dead by the 50s. Ironically, it was the kind of wholesome stuff of Donna Reed, that sort of like Presbyterian middle American thing, that killed it off in America. I often find it interesting that Americans talk about, we need to get back to God and family values, and they point to something like the Donna Reed show, which was completely soulless. And I think that's really what happened. The vacuum appeared. And in that vacuum, this desire for some kind of spiritual thing was required. And a combination of both, should we say, CIA occultism and science fiction, particularly anything to do with aliens and spacemen and space dudes after Roswell and films like The Day the World Stood Still, it created this kind of space Jesus thing. Now, people talk about the hippies in the old days as a kind of, far out radical man, this kind of thing. But none of them really were. If you get down, you see so many interviews with hippies or speak to people who were hippies back in the 60s. A lot of them were Jesus freaks. Big time Jesus freaks. Big time. And, they weren't really, they were still stuck in the Abrahamic mentality. But because of this kind of Anglo-sphere Presbyterian soulless void, coupled with the kind of space flying saucer kind of thing, this somehow morphosized into a kind of that Jesus was coming from the stars. That awful song by Chris de Burgh, a spaceman came traveling, all this kind of thing. That somehow, man, we're going to make contact, man. We're going to make the contacts, man, with the flat space Jesus, man. This kind of thing, And Jesus is all right by me. This kind of thing, coupled with that. And this idea that salvation comes from the stars. So all they did was take Jesus out of the Middle East and put him into a flying saucer. Okay? Now, there was a band called Klaatu, a Canadian band who self-consciously did everything to try and sound like the Beatles during their Sgt. Pepper phase, right down to the French horns, like a Penny Lane, that kind of sound. And Klaatu the records were very heavily overproduced. But they wrote a song for an album called 347 EST, and the song was called Calling Occupants of Interplanetary Craft. This was actually a single released in 1976. Now, I know you're going to want me to talk about the Carpenter's version, but I will later. But I'm just putting in this in. It was actually, I think it might have been a B-side, I don't know. Or it was the double A side with another song called Sub Rosa Subway. And it came out in March to August 1975. It was recorded in Toronto. The song is actually the original album is kind of a proggy 14 minutes long, 7 minutes 14 seconds long, and it was released by Capitol around the world. The single was narrowed down to 3 minutes 23 seconds, which is a big jump. That's like less than half cut off. But the band are kind of weird. You can't get much information on them, and other than who they are and all this stuff. And the music's crap. It's like if you got Sgt. Pepper's Beatles mixed it with Uppet People. Do you remember Uppet People? The whole hi, I'm John Wayne here, and I'm going to talk about this fine group of young people who don't do drugs, who don't drink alcohol, and represent good, wholesome American values, while the homosexuals in the group are not drilling each other in the poop chute backstage. And it's truly this group is the son of God. Up at people. It's sort of like this wonderful thing they were supposed to be, like wholesome, that kind of thing. And they didn't threaten Middle America like these rock and rollers do, this kind of thing. And it had that soullessness sound. You see, the whole thing of a cult is a lack of soul. You get that in like Jehovah's Witness types or ex-Jehovah's Witnesses and stuff like that. There's a lack of soul there that's not pathological in the sense of, say, a psychopath or a malignant NPC has. It's a different kind of soullessness. There's a lack of soul there, and it could have all the bells and whistles and all the best production in the world, and it still sounds like it's the musical version of a cake that has every flavor and fruit in it. Just makes you want to puke. It's just sickening looking. These cupcakes they had like in the 2000s and the 1990s. They were horrible looking things. Supposed to be like every kind of horrible flavor put in. Baking and pastries is like comedy. Brevity is the essence and less is more. And the same kind of thing with music. If you listen to like Dark Side of the Moon, that's not overly produced. There's tons of space in that. Yet it sounds like this amplified widescreen sound. Well, that's because there was soul in Dark Side of the Moon. When there was no soul in these kinds of albums that don't have it, and you get the same kind of soul you get in like flying saucer cults or alien contactee cults. Now, what happened with this song Calling Occupants from Interplanetary Craft was there was a guy who was a member of the band called John Woloschuk. If that's what I'm pronouncing that correctly, Woloschuk. And he was a member of Klaatu, and he was one of the song composers, and he said the idea of the song came from actual events that was described in a magazine called The Flying Saucer Reader. Actually, it was a book, by a guy called J. David, and it was published in the late 60s. Back in March 1953, there was an organization called the International Flying Saucer Bureau, and it sent a bulletin to all its members urging them to participate in an experiment called World Contact Day, whereby at a predetermined date and time, they would all telepathically try to connect with the aliens, Space Brothers, and chanting the words, calling occupants on interplanetary craft. Now, could you imagine, it was the International Flying Space Bureau had thousands of people, and here's how the chant went: calling occupants on interplanetary craft. Calling occupants on interplanetary craft. We have been observing our planet Earth. We of the IFSB wish to make contact with you. We are your friends, and we would like to make an appearance here on Earth. Like you to make an appearance here on Earth. Your presence before us will be welcomed with the utmost friendship. We will do all in our powers to promote universal understanding between people and the people, your people and the people of Earth. Please come in peace and help us in our earthly problems. Give us some sign that we will have received our message. Be responsible for creating a miracle here on our planet to wake up the ignorant ones to reality. Let us hear from you. We are your friends. Now, they would have got contacted all right. They would have got contacted by demons. And I bet nearly everyone involved in that World Contact Day, their lives fell apart afterwards. Because as you know, with these low-level entities, they'll tell you anything you want to be. Hi, I am Spurtek of the planet Quad. I am here to give you information that will help bring peace to your planet. Oh my God, I've just been contacted by the Space Brothers. Oh my God. And the reality is you got yourself a low-level demon. Now, what happens to demons when you lure them in? I'm going to now get some more information. Sportek of the planet Quav, can you please give us some information on how we can receive pure energy? Sportek of the planet Quav, he says that we must wait for its predetermined time and date, and in the meantime we must continue to ask for contact from Squab. And 6 months later, he's in a psychiatric hospital wearing a straitjacket and being given high doses of lithium and thorazine. Why? Because the entity has entered him. Once you start to believe the voice, once you start to create ritual around these ideas, the low-level trash of the demonic world comes spewing in. And what they then do is they possess the individuals involved and they eat them alive. And that's what happened. Now, with World Contact Day, they didn't have the internet. They didn't even have mass media. In World Contact Day, they were just a bunch of freaks on the outskirts. They weren't up with people, so they didn't have that mainstream impact. And Klaatu, when a band is Klaatu, when they covered it, they were not that well known. They were not that famous. They were just a bad Canadian hippie copy act with mushy, creepy, annoying music. However, that wasn't the case with the Carpenters. And I'll talk about that in a little while. But I want to talk about something else first. Let's continue on what we were talking about, soullessness, the lack of soul. You know I'm always talking about Bongo Man at these events? And you're trying to meditate as the sun is coming up in the solstice, right? You're sitting there trying to meditate, and here you're on the hill of Tara or Newgrange or in Glastonbury or somewhere, and you're trying to meditate as the solstice sunrise is coming up, and behind you is this Tarquin, or it'd be the Irish version with Finian, there's dreadlocks going. Well, you know why Bongo Wanker is there? Because Bongo Wanker's actually been sent in by the demon world to disrupt the beautiful personal thing. Now, if they were all standing there as the sun was rising and they were going, "Coming to me, Lou, coming to me, Lou," chanting like that, calling occupants on interplanetary sun, then they'd all get possessed. But they're sitting there in a meditative form, watching the sun rise and thinking to themselves. And they're enhancing their spiritual state, their meditative sense. and they're wondering if this is the same sunset our ancient ancestors saw and how beautiful it is. And behind them is bongo wanker. See, bongo wanker is sent there by the demon world to disrupt true spiritual elevation. That's bongo wanker, you know. He's the audible version of these cosplay pagans that call them and druids who get all dressed up like fucking Radagast or, you know, Maleficent. What's her name? Your one in Maleficent. And they take photographs of themselves and say, "Blessed be Samhain," you know, and you know, from our family. It's all cosplay bollocks. They're just all they're doing is advertising that they have no soul. And you'll find there's a huge Jehovah's Witness element in that as well, and all that. Like, you know, the sort of yurt rapists with the staff. A lot of them will be all like ex-JWs have all just gone into their new cult. There's nothing real there. But bongo wankers the same. Yes, I do have a real bongo, believe it or not. I just use it for my own music, but I don't play. I don't go to events and go. And and that's a demon world trying to destroy a real sense of transcendental feeling, meditation, spiritual elevation. And he's there because two reasons. One, he's probably he has no musical ability. Going is hardly, you know, Ian Pace or Neil Peart or Budgie from Susie and the Banshees or Larry Mullen Jr. It's not real, or Buddy Rich. It's not like real incredible drumming. Funny enough, Karen Carpenter, what was she famous for? Real incredible drumming. You see how it's all coming together, folks. This is why the Velocity of Now is special. I had no idea about the Karen Carpenter drumming thing until I saw my bongo today, and I was reminded why so much I hate Bongo Man, why I hate him so much. And Bongo Man has no musical talent. Bongo Wanker has no desire except to disrupt your beautiful moments of watching the sunrise. And I've seen you see the videos where you see very nice families. They're not dressed up in cosplay. They're not looking like Egypts, looking like they're rejects from like some bad fantasy movie. And they're all sitting there enjoying it. Behind us, and you can actually see someone looking around going, "Will you ever shut that fucker up?" Now that's the male version, Bongo Wanker. Bongo Wanker with his dreadlocks is the male version of the demon who arrives at these events in order to destroy them. There's a female version, believe it or not. And what the female version is Fire Spinning Bitch. Fire Spinning Bitch is the demon world's version of the interruptive factor in a thing like this. Fire Spinning Bitch shows up at nighttime. So there you all are with your friends, right? And you're watching the fire. You're sitting around, and it might be on the Beltane's Eve, Valpurgis night. You're sitting around watching the fire flaming, right? And you're saying, "Oh, that's all very nice, right?" And Bongo Wanker starts up. But along with that is Fire Spinning Bitch. Now, Fire Spinning Bitch has she'll either have batons that are on fire, and she sort of just waves them around in the air like she's doing something incredible. Or she'll have fire in two cans. And this is the classic, I have no soul. And it's usually some like rat bag who smells of late-term abortions, weed, and psychiatric medications. And she's sitting there spinning her fire around in these two cans, looking for attention, because she's trying to take your attention away. The demon inside her is trying to take your attention away from the actual you being enchanted by the flames and embers in the fire. because that's where the real spirit, that's why the fire and the heart home and the whole concept of the heathen people of the heart fire, that's why that's so important. The meditative thing of staring into the fire is at night is very similar to the looking at the sun rising on the solstice. It makes you think about yourself. It makes you think about your world. It makes you think about your life. And then beside you, you have fire spinning bitch with her 2 cans of fire spinning them around. And it's like you're not allowed by the demons in both of these creatures to sit there and just lose yourself within a sense of oneness with the dancing simulacrum of the fire flames and the glowing, pulsating embers of the wood at the bottom of the fire pit, where, the gestation of stories and mythology and all kinds of sagas came from that. And I can guarantee you for a fact, when they were in ancient Nordic world, or the ancient Celtic world, or the ancient Saxon world, and they were looking at the fire and the embers, they were coming up with, you'd have the sages coming up with stories of great heroes. You wouldn't have had, Tarquin in his fucking, his dreadlocks, and his or top hat. That's a big one, a top hat too, with a feather sticking out of it. Because, he speaks you like, I'm real fucking, Glastonbury me. That kind of thing, right? And there's fire spinning bitch, the soulless wagon, spinning the fire around, taking your attention off the embers. They're both possessed by demons, and their job is to take your personal focus with the divine away. Oh look, she's spinning fire! Oh look! A guy's taking photographs of her with long exposure rate, so it looks like really spectacular on her Facebook page, to compensate for the fact that she has no soul. Yes, I was at the Henley Regatta last week. Anyway, let me take a sip of tea here. So here we are, the end of the year 2022, and we've all come full circle, I think, this year. There's no getting around the fact that they're dying all around us by the needlecraft. It's unbelievable. I've lost count. It's like an avalanche, and we've only just started. And this could be, look, the needlecraft to the NPCs and the normies was the calling occupants of interplanetary craft to save them from the psychological terrorism that was imposed upon them by the media and the establishment and the globalists. And they were going, calling needlecraft on Dr. Fauci's syringe. And it was like that. Calling needlecraft on Dr. Fauci's syringe. Stick it in my arm right now. And they got the same thing because the DNA was disrupted and destroyed. And they destroyed their ancestral DNA. Low-level demons will come when you are screaming for salvation. Just as before I put this in, a strange noise was heard while I was editing the show. Let's listen again. Low-level demons will come when you are screaming for salvation. Low-level demons will come. Low-level demons will come. Well, that was extremely strange. There was an increased hum that came out of nowhere, and just as I said, low-level demons, it came in. So let's return back to the show as it was meant to be sent out. I just thought that was an interesting thing that happened, and maybe some of you want to check it out to see if you can hear anything else inside it. And you have to remember, the actual needlecraft was pharma-Jesus. Pharmacological Jesus. That's what that was for them. Because whenever the archetype is removed, it's filled with a compensatory archetype. It's filled with a compensatory archetype. And it became that Pharma Jesus, and it wasn't just only, oh, get your needlecraft. Oh good. Cambridge Socialist Workers' Party is having our open day for needlecraft. It was God. What about Dolly Parton? How many of us wept when we saw what she did to the song Jolene? How many of us, one of the greatest songs ever written? How many of us saw? How many? I can honestly tell you, there are certain points in my life that I knew that something non-human had taken over everything in this world and was now running it. And one of those prime moments that I in my existence, in my life, that I noticed that was Dolly Parton and what she did to Jolene. That was one of those moments I said, it is like the movie They Live. There's something going on here. We've been invaded. There's something going on. And they've now taken near full control, except for us and the tribes and people like us. They've now taken, and I mean, so you didn't need we space brothers come and save us, this kind of thing. You didn't need that. You just took songs that were, and they did it with all kinds of music, like there's idiots like Mick Jagger. I've never liked the Rolling Stones. One or two songs, but I've always thought they were massively overrated. And the horrible Foo Fighters doing that little song about getting your needlecraft. But I don't. In Ireland, we have this thing called Colchian Western, and it's a specific kind of Irish country music, and it's all about four roads to Glenamady, and the songs are usually about things like mothers, tractors, and missing your home. And it's a completely harmless form of music. I mean, when I was growing up, I thought it was stupid. But now I listen to it now, it kind of makes me feel nice. It's kind of like a part of old Ireland or something. It's country and western music sung with my dear old Irish mammy from the county of Roscommon. Loch Ree, where the four counties meet. Longford, Westmeath and Roscommon. And do you want your old lobby washed down, sunshine? And completely harmless songs, meant with nothing other than to make people feel good. That into that music. I guess if you're outside Ireland, the nearest you probably heard it might have been Daniel O'Donnell, although he slicked it up a bit, and maybe Nathan Carter. He's kind of slicked it up a bit too as well. But from that world, a kind of a country thing, but sung with a strong Irish provincial accent, which is one of the reasons I liked it, because it was unashamedly parochial in the best kind of way, and completely harmless, and it'd be. I was thinking there's probably death metal songs, this kind of thing. Would there be would there be a Colchian Western version, the transubstantiation of the sacred needlecraft? Don't be a fool, don't be daft. Your brother and your father and your uncle is dead. Get yourself the needlecraft or you won't be wed. That kind of thing. If they went that far. That's when you know. So one of the reasons I now have decided that those who weren't possessed by this alien force that licked the earth from a distance when it took notice of us are probably the ones not possessed, and it's probably things like Irish country and western music that just continues to go on, even though those poor people, so many of them were lured into their destruction. But things like that, things that never got involved in that, things that never touched that. You have to be look, it's magic again, You have to be very, very careful about what you put out there, because ultimately it's a signal. It's a transmission into the abyss, and you don't know what's listening on the other side. Calling occupants on interplanetary craft. Calling occupants on Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, Moderna craft.
People ask me, What are you most proud of? What you have created during the last 50 years? There are two things. First, when I looked for my first employee, I met my wife. That's one reason to be proud of. But I'm most proud of the community which we built. It's a community consisting of you, the politicians who are here. We have created strong, trustful relationships practically with every international organization, with every government. But we are thankful particularly to our partners and members who are so much engaged in what we are doing. We are grateful to the engagement, for the engagement of civil society. So many NGOs also here, faith leaders, and we will see this evening also cultural leaders. I want to greet particularly also our young leaders, our young global leaders, our global shapers. Where are you? You see a very strong component of the VoN community. Now, why I'm so proud of this community? Because those are people really still believing in the interconnectivity which we have in our world, into the fact that we are all interdependent, which believe in the strength and force of action. People ready to work together to improve the state of the world. People who know that change is not just happening, but change can be shaped by us. And I know everybody in this hall has the goodwill to contribute to shape a better world. But that's what we want to do during the next 4 days. Tomorrow I will say a little bit more about the program. But now I come back to the origin of the annual meeting. In 1970, I wrote a book, and in that book I conceptualized the stakeholder concept, is to construct the next 50 years in a very positive, collaborative stakeholder spirit.
I think that many of you people out there were probably a lot like me growing up, and you looked around the rest of the people around you, and you thought to yourself, how the fuck did I end up on this planet? And I think that cynicism that we were born with, that made us outsiders and freaks, is probably ultimately what saved our lives from the needlecraft. The Colin Wilson thing, when he was reading the Bhagavad Gita on the bus in Leicester when he was growing up, and says, other people's worlds are very different than mine, aren't they? And yes, they are. And I know some would say there's a kind of chauvinism in this, that we're looking down on others. But it's very difficult not to. It's very difficult to have gone through the whole last 3 years and not look down on what you would call the normie or the average, person, or the blids, as I used to call them when I was a little kid growing up. I don't know where that name came from. I was just reading about, there's a hydration drink, an energy drink, that was pushed online by some social media influencers who I never heard of, KSI and Logan Paul. I've never heard of these people. And I'm just looking at the Guardian here today, and it's a classic example of normies got a norm. And these are the people who basically imposed tyranny upon us since 2020. And my attitude is, now that they're all being harvested by the demon from the abyss, that they look to their sides when they're just about to be harvested, and they do their pirouette of annihilation before falling spastic on the floor, never to be reborn again. It's very difficult for me to feel sorry for them when I read something like this. I mean, the reason, if there was an alien invasion, a body snatchers invasion of this earth, like I was talking about in the previous section on the Klaatu, which is actually, ironically, well, we all know that it's the robot from The Day the Earth Stood Still, but that was a Space Jesus movie. I'm reading this article here. Customers queued outside stores before dawn, jostled other shoppers, and even dived headfirst into display units on Thursdays as sales for the sought-after YouTube-promoted drink Prime Hydration kicked off with a fizz at Aldi supermarkets all over the UK. It's sold at $1.99 each, and the craze has been fueled by the drink's limited availability. Now, what does that sound like regarding, oh please, I hope they have enough needlecraft for me? Before Christmas, it was previously only available online at Asda, where it sold for £2 a bottle. Some people were selling it for up to £10,000 for a single bottle of an energy drink on eBay. You know, is it any wonder that this alien cosmic horror demonic force that has taken over this earth saw this planet as an easy target? I shall continue. Videos online shared on social media showed shoppers waiting outside stores in the dark and others crowding around the bottles inside Aldi in stores from Bolton to London to Plymouth as shoppers made a bid to pick up the drink before it sold out. In one video filmed by a customer to the Aldi in Chelmsford in Essex, shoppers grappled to grab bottles and several children dived into the display until they reached a drink. And not only that, I saw another video of like a man who was probably in his early 60s pushing a child out of the way to make sure. And you look at this guy, you wouldn't think he'd be the type that would fall for social media influencers, but he pushes a little kid out of the way brutally and calls him a name just to get this energy drink. It's the kind of Black Friday thing. A fucking energy drink. The energy drink sold in 500ml bottles and available in 6 flavours including blue raspberry and ice pop is the result of a business venture between former boxing rivals Paul and KSI. Oh, I guess that they're boxers then. I don't follow this stuff. The pair both found fame on YouTube and have hordes of mostly teenage fans. But yeah, it says hordes of mostly teenage fans, but I'm looking at the photographs of the ones queuing outside Aldi the night before the drink was released, and I'd say the average age of them is probably 40. Now, you could say those guys are getting it for their kids, but something tells me they're not. In several videos, Aldi staff could be seen trying to control crowds of customers after the store opened. Is this thing worth saving? This thing they call the human, is it worth saving? The discount supermarket chain tweeted on Wednesday to notify customers that Prime was arriving in all UK stores exactly the same as when the needlecraft came to Ireland. They had, I'm not joking, they had the actual needlecraft inside refrigerators touring the country like tabernacles. The Evening News. It's on its way now down to Waterford. It's coming into Leitrim right now. And they all salivating. It's incredible. It's like, these are the ones who are saying that us who are purebloods should have been locked up, not allowed into pubs, and have our human rights taken away from us. These are the same ones. Low-level demons infecting NPCs. We're sorry that some customers were unable to get their hands on the product. However, demand has been extremely high. We limited purchase to one or each variant per customer so that many customers as possible had a chance to buy it. This is what I'm saying. You know, this is what I say. Like when I hear people say, you know, from the old days, We gotta wake everybody up. We gotta wake everybody up. No, because that's what you will wake up. And you do not want the hordes of demon-possessed, cosmic alien, infected beasts around you when they're woke up. Bullshit. When will the people wake up? I hope they never fucking wake up, because that's what they are. That's what's out there, folks. It is not what you think it is. It's not that you, like the movie They Live, where there's one or two of them are those like weird aliens. It's most of them. We have been conditioned all our lives to think that evil approaches us, or wickedness comes in a stereotypical baddie or monstrous guise. Some of the most pernicious evil on this planet comes with a sit down and let's have a cup of tea and let's talk. Coffee time. I'm here to listen and talk to you and tell you how things are. Delivery. They don't look like a monster or a demon. Now, since the beginning of the Needlecraft Rona episode, there's been this character called Dr. Campbell, an English doctor of nursing, who has gathered up a colossal YouTube following. And in the early days when he first began, everything was trust the science, conspiracy theorists are all nut jobs, the WEF is full of wonderful people, get that thing into your arm ASAP, blah blah blah, trust Lancet, trust Nature magazine, trust the authority. And he built up an audience of kind of Americans and Canadians who think that TV shows like All Creatures Great and Small is typical of how all people in England are. He's like an English country doctor. He's like something from a Barbara Cartland book or that kind of thing. He's like he's a nice country gentleman, English doctor who will have a cup of tea with us and do this. Well, now, as we have entered the darkest of all shadows and they're dropping like flies, he's trying to portray this thing of being red-pilled. He's potentially responsible for the deaths of maybe hundreds of thousands of people if this thing pans out to be as bad as what it is. And some people are trying to say, he's had his road to Damascus moment and he's apologising. He didn't apologise. He was saying things. He uses this excuse of where the evidence takes us, that's where we are. Figured out, well, maybe he hasn't. Maybe he's always known this, that the evidence has taken us into pure evil runs the earth. And everyone's trying to make out that, he's come around, he's on our side now. But is he really? Is someone who got... Look, for me, one of the ultimate red flags is Russell Brand. If you become on the Russell Brand show, you're probably evil. You all know my attitude towards Russell Brand. He is a Fabian gatekeeper. He basically uses a combination of banker socialism, because that's what he actually was told to go out and say on Newsnight those years ago, and all the dumb truthers believed them. And he developed a little kind of like cult of truthers, like, Russell's going to save us, Russell, this kind of thing, And at the time he was telling that, talking about distribution of wealth, he had something like 9 houses and, worth millions, and he's supposed to be cool, and it's unbelievable bullshit. Then spiritual socialism, and now he's like on Hay House selling these stupid books for the stupid people who are very soulless. The whole thing that defines the New Age thing is the lack of soul, and he's the poster boy for that. But Campbell was all over that show. That's an enormous red flag. I almost get the impression, and I may be wrong, and I hope I am wrong, that Campbell's whole thing was to play the country doctor with the cup of tea and sympathy to get them all into the trap, and then reveal to them all that it was a lie, and now he's going, nah, gotcha, suckers. But maybe it's not him that's doing it. Maybe he's infected. Maybe this cosmic force has taken him over. It always seems to be like that. Or maybe he's one of them. Maybe it's that another they live moment, that rather than Campbell has been red-pilled, he's just allowed us to put on the they live glasses to see what he really is. I hope I'm wrong, because I wouldn't want to be, in either way, I wouldn't want to be in his position or anyone's position with a soul or a sense of conscience who led people into the transubstantiation and slew them in the name of Mother Hydra's children. Coming back around to the Karen Carpenter's version of calling occupants of interplanetary craft, I can remember when I first heard that song, it was on Top of the Pops, and one of the DJs who was on that show, he was one of them that was busted as a sex freak later on. Or Travis, Dave Lee Travis, was that his name? I can't remember. But he did the part in the middle, "We have been observing your Earth," and he was dressed like an alien or some stupid looking thing like that. And as a kid, I remember thinking, I can actually remember the first pop music I ever heard that I loved was Carpenter's. I couldn't believe, even as a little kid, how beautiful and delicious that music sounded. How her voice had this pitch perfection that was like almost supernatural. And interestingly enough, on the precipice of being too perfect. This is what made her voice so incredible, is that she had this perfect voice that was just about to be too perfect and unnatural, but limited itself just before that point. So it was perfection without sugary sweetness destroying it, or over professionalism destroying it, or over virtuosity destroying it. It was perfect. And there was all those beautiful songs that they did with her brother Richard Carpenter. Now, we all know towards the end of her life, she became affected by anorexia and was literally eaten alive until she died. And it's one of the saddest stories ever, because if they were still going, they'd be still huge. I mean, they'd be still enormous. And she had a sound and a thing that would have lasted forever. Forever. But that was the last time that I ever saw the Carpenters ever in the high-profile way. After that, they never really existed anymore. It was like the end of their career. And I hated that song from the moment I heard it. I hated it. It was just weird. There was something not right about it. There was something unsettling and disturbing about it, especially that key change at the end, which isn't on the original version by Klaatu. Calling occupants on it, and then it goes goes up an octave. And it just was, I thought the song was horrific and creepy, but it appeals to those flying saucer cults. You could see them like they're in a house in California going, calling occupants on interplanetary craft. That you could see that. You could see that. There was that you could see that as clear as anything. And in many ways, what happened to Karen Carpenter following the recording of that song is very similar to what's happened to the entire planet since 2020 and the beginning of all the Rona stuff and the ping pong and the transubstantiation and the boosters and everything. What's happening to the human race right now is what happened to Karen Carpenter following the recording of that song. I believe that song, just like flying saucer cults with a chant, she became infected by a low-level demon that entered into her and ate her alive. And it was called anorexia, but it was an actual entity. Now, in order for an entity to enter into someone, you can't just sing that song alone. There has to be a ritualistic element to it. There has to be ritual. There has to be ceremony. There has to be pomp. And my God, was that delivered in the 1978 TV show for ABC Television America called The Carpenter's Space Encounters. Someone had the idea in ABC to fuse the trend at the time in space movies and alien stuff. Of course, Star Wars was an enormous hit, culturally so. The name Space Encounters clearly came from Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which was a gigantic movie. And honestly, when I saw that movie as a child in the cinema, it absolutely blew my mind. The special effects, especially when that thing appears at the end. But in hindsight, when I watch the movie now, it looks like garbage. Well, actually, it's not a bad movie until they go to the mountain, in the famous mountain, to go and, see where the big spaceship is. And that whole scene where at the end it becomes, there's a big problem I have with a lot of Steven Spielberg's movies, is they're full of this sort of schmaltz and crap. And he goes to the mountain, Devil's Tower in Wyoming, he's been called in there. Now the whole early part of the film where you'd have like the brief encounters with spaceships or aliens or whatever, and you had the scene where he's building the giant mountain. He's obsessed with building this giant mountain with Richard Dreyfuss. That's all fantastic. And so is the part where the little boy is taken by the aliens. The part when the screws are coming out of the heating vent in the floorboards, that was just terrifying to me as a kid, where the screws open up by themselves. The film was amazing, until they actually got to Devil's Tower in Wyoming, and it turned into a piece of schmaltzy, glitzy, overblown American Midwest white bread pap, kitsch, twee, all the superlatives you can think for things that are just aimed at the lowest level of entertainment for people who are very superficially indulged by such. So, with all that, between Star Wars and Star Trek had made a big comeback around that time. There was, I don't know if the Star Trek motion picture, which is absolutely fantastic if you haven't seen it, had been released by then, but it was around that time. There was so many films about space stuffs and TV shows and everything. Space and space aliens was all the rage. And of course, you had there's tons of books and stuff were out then, and it was complete opposite of hauntological version of it. If you look at this, there's another video on this Beyond Room 313 channel here, and it's about an alien UFO watchers in Ireland in the 1970s. It is fantastic, but that was when being interested in this stuff was underground, and it was among a certain kind of bunch of sort of like free thinkers. But after Star Wars and Close Encounters, the whole alien thing became, for the low-level sheeple, if you want to call them that, suddenly they were interested in him. And in a very infantile way, as like everything else they do. So this was all culminated in this TV show called Space Encounters. And I'll read the synopsis from Wikipedia, because it's bang on. You can actually watch the thing on YouTube if you want. It's that classic American, prime time 70s rubbish. But it's profound in other ways, which I'll explain. So the synopsis from Wikipedia goes, Space Encounters begins with Richard and Karen Carpenter performing Sweet, Sweet Smile in their recording studio, assisted by Charlie Callis. As they are performing, we see they are being observed by occupants of an alien spaceship with Jim Davidson and Suzanne Summers, who are on their way to meet the carpenters. After Richard and Karen finish their song, the lights in the studio begin to flicker uncontrollably, and musical instruments begin to move and play by themselves. At that moment, John teleports down to the studio and tells Richard and Karen how the people from his planet lack the ability to make music, and he requests their help. Richard and Karen tell John about their early days in the music business, and John uses his high-tech pocket video screen to show the carpenters performing fun, and dancing in the street. After watching them, John tells them he wants to try singing himself, and he teleports to a more romantic setting to perform Just the Way You Are. The carpenters continue to reminisce about their earlier recordings, and then perform Goofus in an old garage, similar to the one in which they record their first record. Richard on piano then performs a Space Encounters medley, which includes the themes to Close Encounters of the Third Kind and Star Wars, on stage with a full orchestra complete with lasers and starlight effects. Back in the studio, Karen and John continue to reminisce about their early days in music as she performs Little Girl Blue afterwards, and everybody teleports up to the spaceship's own nightclub, the Galaxy Room, where Richard plays piano picker and Karen and Susan perform Man Smart, Woman Smarter. Karen and John then perform the old-fashioned way, and then the whole cast, complete with dancers, perform a disco medley, including The Hustle, Boogie Nights, and I Could Have Danced All Night. The Carpenters then perform Calling Occupants on Interplanetary Craft, and then the show ends with an instrumental version of We've Only Just Begun, which was one of their biggest hits. Folks, what the whole thing is, unknowingly, is a gigantic ritual. It's a ritual for the sacrificing of Karen Carpenter to the occupants. And it has all the elements that a magical ritual has. Am I saying this was deliberately laid out this way? No, of course not. It was just a piece of crap American primetime garbage. But we're right in the period of the days of chaos magic here, that you have to be very careful. As Crowley said, every conscious act is an act of magic, so you better learn to do it properly, or it'll be done for you. And that's a classic example of them doing a magical act with this TV show on Space Encounters, and it being done for them. Now, there's all kinds of elements of the ritual. There's the beginning where they're in the normal world, where they're doing a song in a studio with this rubbish comedian, this idiot, and an unnaturalism appears. Let me tell you, does musical instruments playing by themselves and spooky poltergeist activity sound like an alien encounter to you? It doesn't. It doesn't. It's an encounter with the demonic. What is behind poltergeists? Demons. So it begins with an invocation of demons, with this kind of horrible song called Sweet, Sweet Smile, that kind of honky-tonk crap which I can't stand. And then we go to the spaceship where we have the Hierophant, which is played by some kind of good-looking guy, American singer, TV presenter called John Davisons, and the High Priestess, played by Suzanne Summers. I mean, it's practically already a Gnostic mass. And they're on their way, these occupants, to meet the Carpenters. When Richard and Karen finish the song, the lights in the studio are going crazy and everything. And at that moment, when it's and with all these weird noises and everything happened, John Davison appears in the studio like a manifestation of an entity, a holy guardian angel or something. And he takes them on a life review. A life review. They go back to when they were starting out as children, as if to say, this is the end of the Carpenters. It's over. You're getting a life review. You're the drowning woman, a drowning man. And then they take they take John Davidson into this reality where he performs the Billy Joel song, Just the Way You Are. Then you have them all these goofy sections. This is the clown, the jester, the fool. And then when you have Karen and Suzanne singing Man Smart, Woman Smarter, which was actually covered by Robert Palmer. And it's not a bad song as that kind of stuff goes. And that's actually the best part in the whole show, is where Karen Carpenter and Suzanne Summers perform Man Smart, Woman Smarter. It's the only thing on the show from an entertainment level of what I'd want to be entertained with actually works. They're both excellent, and it works really well. And it's also kind of like hermaphroditic, the fusing of the male and the female. There's an alchemical wedding aspect to it. And all along during this thing, they're doing that. And it ends with the final salutation to the occupants, and ends with, we've only just begun. Music medley. Only just begun what? What have we only just begun? Well, you've only just begun your relationship with the entity that you called down on this TV ritual. And I often wondered I would often love to have met and spoken, been friends with Karen Carpenter in the weeks and days following this. And I guarantee you she'd have many of the same things that people I know who are on our side or have come to our side who took the transubstantiation and said they felt like a force was landed inside them. They didn't feel right. Now, an NPC or a normie is never going to admit that, because they don't have the depth of personality or the depth of consciousness to be aware of that. But I guarantee she never found. And your man Richard Carpenter, no matter what you think about him, he comes across a bit of a dick, but no matter what you think of him, he did lose his career with the death of his sister. Long before that, with her deterioration. And she made many of the same mistakes people who are infected often do. They go into bad relationships, they can't think properly, they can't behave properly, they're confused and distorted and bewildered. They queue up at 5 a.m. outside Aldi to get an energy drink. They behave irrationally. This is part of the dance macabre. Expect to see more of this. There's the whole, and this is, you look back down the last 3 years or so, what we were watching when we saw the nurses dancing on TikTok was just that. The dance macabre of the ritual. There's no difference between this TV show that the Carpenters did with these dumb dance numbers, and there was even a part in that show where the Charlie Callis shit comedian ends up having a paedophile relationship with a robot. Don't believe me? Go watch it. Go watch it. It's on YouTube. You don't live in a world that your school teachers told you lived in. We, as humans, have one major trajectory in this life, and that is to undo the miasma of confusion, bewilderment, double standards, and paradoxical things we encounter all our lives. Until the day arrives when we finally figure out that when the movie They Live is not a movie, it is a documentary. That's what's out there, but that was even nothing compared to what's really happening. What's really happened now is so obvious and so in your face that it's just tribal groups like us who have any chance going forward. Something happened that made us be noticed by occupants. And these occupants or occupant, or this cosmic Lovecraftian horror entity, has now come to feed on this planet, scaled up from how it fed on Karen Carpenter during that TV special. Watch everyone you know who's fully transubstantiated fall apart. Watch them closely. They're growing old rapidly. They're losing their vital spark. To use the expression from religion, they have fallen from grace. They are entering into negative charisma, if any of them had any charisma to begin with. They have obtained their occupant. The spaceships that the aliens landed in were about 100 millimeters long, made out of nylon, with a metal needle on the top and a body full of a liquid that included RNA that was injected into them. Just as we had made massive rockets like Saturn V's up into that realm, they sent them back to us in the form of syringes. Cosmic horror warfare. And we've made it. We've survived. We're here. We are literally, like the Blue Oyster Cult song, veterans of the psychic wars. And the reason why we didn't become eaten alive by the alien cosmic demonic force is because we have this cynicism, or we developed this cynicism throughout our life. And a lot of it had to come from the fact that we may have encountered a psychopathic individual during our life, where you grew up believing that everyone behaves in a certain way of decency and respect to each other, cordial approaching and so on, symbiotic respect. And then you encounter these things and you're like, what the hell is that? And often they cause tremendous damage in your life. And that tremendous damage is what broke you out of the spell that you were living in a fairy tale that your parents and your society, your culture, the evening TV news, and education put into your mind. In many ways, to have been targeted by a psychopath is a blessing, because you never see the world the same way ever again. Now, when I wrote my book, Puzzling People, The Labyrinth of the Psychopath, back in 2010, 2011, whatever, although I tried to stick mostly, and I used a lot of science in that book, and I read through a lot of scientific journals and papers which are cited all throughout that book, I constantly interjected spiritual elements. I mentioned things such as the jinn. I'd mentioned things such as Lucifer. I'd mentioned various things like that. Meditations on passive evil, incorporeal evil, corporeal evil, and transcendental evil. And I think that's what made that book reach so many people, is because I didn't shy away from the concept of a spiritual evil being behind it. I didn't openly say it because I wasn't ready to reveal that by that point. Of course I believed it when I wrote the book. You know, the section in the appendices about the wealthy families in the UAE and being descendants of jinns was what I was saying, that it is a spiritual thing ultimately. But I left it out there so I didn't firmly nail my paganism to the mast, or my spiritual beliefs or my interest in magic and the occult to the mast. But anyone who was aware of that stuff, even Christian people read that book, would have said, oh, he's going somewhere else with this, that the books to date haven't gone with. And that's why it was so effective. Because, like any good natural philosophy, it did not murder the divine in order to deliver the truth. And this is what's wrong. This is how this alien force conquered the human race. Well, everyone except us and the tribes. and people like us. It did this by killing off, by gaslighting, the soul out of the world. Nothing could be possible unless any kind of spiritual connection to it was annihilated first. And they did that. And when you hear things like trust the science, what that really is saying is kill your soul. Trust the science. Kill your soul. That's what they were telling you all along. And unfortunately, many killed their souls. And the force behind telling them to kill their souls has now killed the rest of them. When you see the WEF or the WHO or the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and all these other types, you think of the generals in an invading cosmic horror demonic army who are completely possessed, perfectly possessed, as that Irish priest that used to work for the Pope used to say, perfectly possessed. Malachi Martin was his name. They even tried to wreck his legacy at the end. There was a documentary made about his life, and it was absolute garbage. It was almost like it was made to laugh at his belief in that these entities were out there and trying to get into people. But they had to get all our teachers, and even though he was a Catholic priest, they had to kill them all off. Just like, even I can remember in the past with David Icke, I would say, yeah, I agree with you, there's entities, but why stop please being specific and saying they're reptilians, because that's really narrowing the bandwidth, because it's something much more than that. But I mean, ultimately the man was right, there's no doubt about that. And that's why they banned him from all of the EU. Ultimately, that's where it is. Where do we go from here as we go into 2023? Well, we go the same place our ancient ancestors went when the first great reset of Christianity happened. We record it. We archive it. We become like the Chaldees. And we move it on for the next later generations of tribes. In the meantime, I'm convinced, and we're already seeing it, that we will see sights in the next few years that we could have never imagined in our lives. In fact, hasn't everything since 2020 been visible? The politicians will become more and more evil, sadistic and smirking. And they'll also become more and more stupid, because there's animals. These are animals who have just been possessed, but they're being eaten away. If you want to know what anyone who's made a pact with the devil, what they look like, look how badly they age. Look how they fall apart. And when they rolled up their sleeves to place that thing inside have that thing placed inside them, to have that alien spaceship land and unload its occupants to occupy them. That's something we will never forget. That's something we will never forget. But it comes with the greatest education ever. And we keep on learning. So that was my New Year's Eve special, or New Year's Day special, depending on where you are, of Velocity of Now, Morning Star broadcast number 2. I hope you're safe and happy and enjoying life. And I always try to tell people, when they watch the news and see the absurdity of it, don't be getting upset by it, because those are the demons feeding off your energy. Ignore and laugh at it. Because the Buddhists taught us that when laughing at the demons is the best way to make them go away. So keep laughing at demons. Good night, take care of yourself. Sanguine Gnosis. Hail Carbonitrogen.